All right, so today what I want to talk to you about is something called population ecology. Now, population ecology is important because it allows us to understand the health of a population, and it basically allows us to statistically study the population to make predictions about how these populations are going to change. Now, a lot of times population ecology is equated to humans, but although several species may share a habitat, they each have their own niche. So really, you can really utilize this for any type of species. Now, real quick, a population is just simply going to be all the individuals of a species that live together in an area. Okay, now, there's three key features of populations, and that's going to be size, that's going to be density, and that's also going to be something called dispersion. Now, we're going to go into each one of these a little bit at a time. Now, size. Size is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the number of individuals. Now, part of size is something called growth rate. Growth rate is a measurement of how rapidly a population is growing. So if we take the natality minus the birth, minus the death, that gives us our growth. Or we could simply say birth minus death equals R, or rate of increase. Now, the next feature that we want to talk about is density. And density is the measurement of population per unit, or unit volume. So, like for example, in the United States, when we talk about population density, we talk about the number of people divided by the unit, and that is square mile. So like North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, we're talking about 782 people per mile. Now, in the United States as a whole, it's about 84 people per mile. So we're much more dense in the Dallas-Fort Worth area than the United States as a whole. So how do you affect density? There are 4 ways that you can affect density. And the first way is immigration with an I. Now, immigration with an I is the movement of individuals into a population. The second way that you affect that is immigration with an E. And immigration with an E is the number of individuals that are exiting a population. The third way that we impact density is through something called biotic factors, or density dependent. These have an increasing effect as the population size increases. So things like disease, things like competition, and even things like parasites. The fourth would be the non-living things, the abiotic factors. And the abiotic factors affect populations regardless of the density. So these would be things like weather or climate. Now, if we want to put all of what I've just mentioned together and determine factors that affect future population growth, we could make this nice little chart right here. We could say immigration adds to, so let's draw our arrow, and if we draw our box here, we have population. So immigration adds to population. Mortality, which is death, takes away population. Natality, which is birth, increases population. And immigration with the I or E subtracts population. All of these things together are the factors that affect future population growth. Now, if we talk about population dispersion, we're particularly talking about three different types of population dispersion. We could have what's called clumped. And in a clumped population, you might have one group here, you might have an outlier here, you might have a group here, they're clumped together, you might have another one grouped here. In general, you could consider that to be kind of how we are with our population in the United States. The second one that we could have would be what's called uniform. And in a uniform population, think about like penguins. Uniform population would be like a set distance, nice spacing, everything is uniform. And third, the last one would be random. And it's exactly how it sounds. Our population could just be randomly dispersed all around. Doesn't matter. There's no uniformity to it. There's no clump to it. It's just random. Now, how do populations grow? Populations grow through two different types. The first one would be exponential. And the second one is going to be something called logistic. So before we get into each one of these, let's talk about something called carrying capacity. Now, carrying capacity is going to be the maximum population size supported by available resources. And there can only be as many organisms in an area as the environmental resources can support. So in a place like North Texas, where we're rapidly growing, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that our population could grow too rapidly. We could end up using our resources too quickly. Those resources don't, renew themselves, especially things like our water, which is, the amount of water that we've had has always been here. It's just that we're taking it out much faster than it can recharge. Now, let's talk about exponential growth. So exponential growth is very rapid population increase. So if I started off at 0 minutes with one cell, and let's say that cell doubles every 20 minutes. It splits every 20 minutes. At 20 minutes, I'm going to have 2 cells. And at 40 minutes, I'm going to have 4 cells. And at 60 minutes, I'll have 8 cells. All the way out until, if we go 12 hours out, I'm going to have 68,719,476,736 cells. So anytime that you see a hand sanitizer that says that it kills 99.99% of all bacteria, if you had 1,000 bacteria on you and it kills 99.99%, it's going to kill off 999 of those bacteria. But if the bacteria reproduces in 20 minutes, within 12 hours, if you never wash your hands again, you'll have a heck of a lot of bacteria on you. So what's this exponential growth curve look like on a graph? If I draw my graph and I have my time in minutes on the bottom, and I have my number of cells on my y, and here I'm going to have 20, I'll have 40, 60, so forth, all the way out to 12 hours. My growth curve is going to be something called exponential growth or a J curve. And it's a J curve because it's going to look exactly like a J. It's going to start off and increase very rapidly. And in the end, it's going to look something like this. Now, when the population reaches carrying capacity where there's no more available resources, this is going to stop, and it's going to kind of flatline itself out, and it might dip down, and it might come back up, and it might dip down. But when the J curve stops, we know we're at K, or carrying capacity. Now, we can factor that also in with something called logistic. Logistic growth is different in that it's much more, I guess you could say, like deliberate growth, very much slower growth. So if this was our year, and we said 1915, and we said 1925, and then we said 1935, and this was our number of individuals on our y-axis, it's going to look more like an S. So it's going to be something that looks more like this, and then kind of comes up, and then slowly increases. So it almost looks like an elongated S, or S curve. Now, what are some factors that might limit our growth rate? If we think about human interaction in the environment, some of those factors might be things like limited food. As our population increases, our ability to feed that population somewhat decreases. And so if our population gets too big, maybe we're not able to feed our population. Also, the buildup of wastes, especially toxic wastes. Those things, the accumulation of things like heavy metals into the environment can really impact the birth rate or increase the death rate. Another thing, as population, one of those density-dependent factors would be something like disease. And lastly, it could be something as simple as predation if we're talking about other types of organisms besides humans. So, if we talk about human population growth, what we end up talking about is that human population growth grows by a J-curve, or exponential. And in fact, human population growth is approximately 80 to 90 million a year. And so our growth rate is about 1.3% per year annually. So this is a very rapid increase. And in fact, it's doubled 3 times in 3 centuries. It took all of humanity until 1960 to reach about 3 billion people in population. And since 1960, we've added another 4 billion. So the estimate is that by 2050, human population is going to be about 9,300,000,000.